This video is brought to you by Audible, the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and today I want to talk to you about Leica's 40 megapixel M10-R and compare it to Leica's 47.5 megapixel SL2. No lab tests, not every use case, not every feature explored and explained, actually just one or two. Really, I just want to share with you a story of using both cameras in this very strange world of ours. My ambition is little more than offering a pleasant and welcome distraction, perhaps, from a pandemic unprecedented in our lifetimes, a confluence of nature, personality, hubris, and human weakness which threatens to destroy us all. Just saying. Now, I'm not going to rehash the more than half-century-long relationship I've had with the Leica brand. Instead, I'll simply put links to all of our previous Leica videos in the show notes down below. I encourage you to start with the 4-part series I did on the original Leica SL. Suffice it to say, for now, that it was a Leica 3A, this one, actually, which started my lifelong passion for photography. The irony is that I've owned or shot literally hundreds of different cameras and 2 or 3 times as many lenses over the years from just about every major brand. Yet for most of that time, other than a year or two interlude with an M8 I bought used on eBay back in 2011, I shot with Canon. In fact, in spite of several false starts, it was only in 2019 that I finally acquired my very first brand new Leica. Surprising myself, I opted for the brilliant little autofocusing CL. This is one of the most underrated systems in the market today. But the CL didn't quench my thirst. It only whetted it. Subsequently, and in rapid succession, I had the opportunity to go hands-on with an M10P, and then an M10D. I edged closer and closer to adding an M10D to our kit that summer. I'd already picked up a Summicron M50 with M2L adapter, but it was the release of Vader in October, Leica's codename for the SL2, that I made up my mind that it would become my very first full-frame digital Leica. A few months after first testing one in Germany and being dazzled by it, my own SL2 arrived. And this is the SL2. It's for my personal use on the street. You've heard me talk about it before. I'm happy. It took another month or two for my Summicron-SL35 to arrive, but when it did, I held in my hands what I thought just might be the last camera and lens I'd ever buy. I mean, I was set. Though, before we get into it, I'd like to tell you about our new sponsor, Audible, the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks. The thing of it is, I was an Audible member long before I was approached by them. I got Ian Fleming's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang for myself, for example, No Children Necessary, narrated by David Tennant. During my Gabriel Allon period, half a dozen of the Daniel De Silva spy thrillers wound up in my Audible library. Most recently, it's been nonfiction. On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder, and just this week, Rage by Bob Woodward. Wow. I recommend all of them to you. But this is the tiniest sampling of just their audiobooks. Their full library includes podcasts, guided wellness programs, theatrical performances, A-list comedies, and something called Audible Originals exclusively that you won't find anywhere else. If this sounds good to you, okay, pun intended, visit audible.com/Hugh Brownstone or text Hugh Brownstone, that's Hugh and then Brownstone, just like the buildings without spaces, to 500 to learn more. This is the internet at its best. I had precisely what I wanted for shooting on the streets of New York. All three of our street photography workshops in New York for 2020 were, in fact, oversubscribed. And then, you know what happened. COVID-19 hit. Like so many others, Claudia and I began to shelter in place. The order would remain in effect for months. Suddenly, the very reason I'd invested in an SL2 system vanished. No rich tapestry of urban textures to capture. No need to punch in to correct for keystoning, looking up at buildings, or improving framing. No need even for autofocus. No thrill in that moment of casual intimacy and connection on the street to reassure me that the world is not a uniformly terrible place. Of course, we refunded all three workshops full of tuition. Immeasurably more important, we lost a loved one. I got depressed. I stopped shooting. I stopped doing videos. Maybe you can relate. But at some point, it dawned on me that if I, with the myriad benefits and privileges I have had as an accident of birth, couldn't sum up perseverance sufficient to power through it, and be grateful for what we do have and what we can do, well, that would just be pathetic. That very day, Claudia and I went out shooting within walking distance of home, she with what had become her CL, me with my SL2 and Apo35 on one shoulder, a loaner M10P for my 5th generation Summicron M50mm f2 on the other. We went out most days. It was surprising. Or maybe not so much. In the weeks and months that followed, as I realized only later, I began working through my emotions with both cameras, creating images like this. But I began to leave the SL2 at home. The M10P was smaller and lighter. My decades-old Summicron was tiny, sharp, and rendered in a way that I suddenly had the time to appreciate. I felt there was nothing I was shooting which required more resolution than the 24-megapixel sensor. The pace of life slowed sufficiently that I became competent with rangefinder and zone focusing. I began leaving the Type 20 Visoflex behind altogether. Ironically, focusing manually meant I never had to devote even a nanosecond to thinking about which focusing mode to set, where to place an AF point, how to activate IAF, or have the system focus on the wrong thing anyway and then miss the moment trying to fix it. It did mean I had to think ahead of time and to decide what I'd be looking for and or how far away from it I'd be, which really meant how large the object would be in the frame. I didn't mind this at all. Pre-visualization is a wonderfully clarifying thing. I entered the no futzing zone, a joy unto itself. And my shots were in focus just about 100% of the time, although I took far fewer of them. To be clear, this is not a comment about my SL2 or any other particular autofocusing camera, but instead a annoying recognition about the evolution of autofocus in general and our thinking about it. How amazing autofocus is on the one hand, especially for sports, birding, and video, yet how every time, have you noticed this, a new or improved autofocus system is released, so many of us suddenly realize how dissatisfied we've been with what we have. How amazing, in fact, was the very first autofocusing Paleolithic era camera I ever owned, back in 1990, a 3 autofocus point EOS 10S, which I bought to photograph our newborn daughter. And yet now we have cameras with 6 pages of menu settings just for autofocus and still don't have the algorithms or processing power to get 100% hit rates uniformly. Manually focusing the M10P was a relief. I was so encouraged that I picked up a tiny mint, where is it here, Elmrit M90 f2.8 on eBay, just like the one I never should have sold in the first place. This is another of Leica's truly unsung lenses. Anyway, those days were a very different kind of experience for us, and we both began to appreciate it. It would be another few months before the mandated shelter-in-place order would lift. A couple more before we'd feel comfortable driving more than 4 miles from home. Then, just about 2 weeks ago, Claudia and I decided to travel an hour west of where we live into Amish country. We wanted to take the next step in challenging ourselves creatively and just getting out of the house. I brought a pile of gear that had been sitting in our testing queue, but the 2 pieces of kit I most looked forward to exploring were Sigma's DGDN85 1.4 on my SL2 and a loaner Leica M10-R with my Summicron-50 and Elmrit 90 2.8. In the course of just half a dozen images or so, shot over a couple of hours in rural Lancaster County that day, it finally hit me. I'd fallen for 2 very different cameras, appealing to the same and different parts of me, supporting different ways of seeing, shooting, and feeling. To my delight, the M10R's 40-megapixel sensor only made my Summicron-50 and Elmrit 90 look better. Candidly, I didn't quite expect images like this, shot in the first half hour we arrived. When I looked closely at the photos of the trains shot with my 50 and 90, I see a level of detail and crispness I'd never seen with these same lenses on the 24-megapixel M10, M10P, or M10D, which, when you think about it, should not be that much of a surprise. I had the time, I took the time to frame it up. I did use, with the 90 anyway, the Type 20 EVF for critical unhurried focus. I stopped down a bit from wide open. I chose subjects and textures where that image quality could achieve a fuller expression than much of what I'd been shooting. And the M10R's sensor is just not that far off from the SL2's. When I look closely at the photo of the drying tobacco leaves in the barn shot with my 50 again on the M10R, I recognize the beautiful Leica colors I've come to expect, as well as the signature rendering of the 50. But I immediately feel and then see, when I pixel peep, a crispness to the lens absent on the lower resolution M's. This had not been a foregone conclusion for me. After these shots, we continued on our way, exploring without a specific destination or agenda other than to enjoy. It was during this time that I pulled out a bunch of the other gear I had from other manufacturers and ran them through their paces. Other videos for other times, other than to say, we also live at a moment when we are spoilt for choice, when the difference between the very good and the very best is smaller than ever. You just don't need a Leica to get incredible shots. You need this, and this, and this. Eventually, as our day drew to a close, and with our other test shots sorted, Claudia spied a graveyard. We hopped out of the car, only with our Leicas. This was going to be just for us again, really. And took it all in. I don't mean to be histrionic, but time itself seemed to slow down. I'm convinced my blood pressure and heart rate must have dropped. We took in an intoxicating mixture of clean air, the scent of the earth, and the luxury of time. We felt the sun on our skin. We connected to a rhythm of life very different from our own. Suddenly, there was all the time in the world for deciding upon the frames we wanted to capture. No sense of anything beyond the moment. Flow, in the zone, whatever you want to call it, we were there. I fired off less than a dozen shots between the M10R and the SL2. Hold that thought. I caught Claudia doing that squatting thing she does in the absence of an articulating screen that I can only ever dream of doing. I will never get there. When we finished, we got back into the car and continued on our way, deciding it was time to head home. As we rounded a bend on the two-lane country road, we came upon an Amish couple up ahead in a horse-drawn carriage. Claudia grabbed her CL, and I grabbed the SL2 with the Sigma 85 while I was driving, and got this. Now, do as I say, not as I do. Do not try this at home. At the time, in that moment, I was stunned by the SL2's autofocus. It was outstanding. Instant, assured, none of that telltale wobble we all look for and find too often in contrast detect-only systems. And with the Sigma 85 1.4 right there with it, which is not always a given with Sigma lenses, I was able to grab the frame I wanted in the blink of an eye, shooting one-handed through the windshield. The color science of that 47.5 megapixel sensor, as always, knocked my socks off. The file gives me so much latitude to pull up the shadows in post. The image quality of the Sigma 85 wide open is stellar, and the combination of the two allows me to punch in afterward to get the framing I saw in my head when I grabbed the shot. Both camera lens combinations operated as extensions of my hands and eye. And those graveyard shots, when I compare them now, the differences in sharpness and contrast are not what separate them in any meaningful way. Instead, it's a slight difference in framing, a function not of the camera, but my knees, or the difference in depth of field between the 90 and 85 at their respective maximum apertures of 2.8 and 1.4 respectively. I mean, I get it now. The autofocusing 5.7 million dot EVF IBIS-equipped larger SL2 allowed me to capture an unplanned moment before I had time to set up the shot, even if I couldn't nail the framing precisely at capture. And it allowed me, of course, to capture everything I saw as I saw it, and when I did have the time, with room to spare in post, get the final image. It was effortless. The manual focus only M10R allowed me to travel lighter, smaller, and capture shots less obtrusively when I had the time to pre-visualize and set it up accordingly. Shooting with an M is, for me, a joy, practically spiritual. But practical too. By using either the auxiliary EVF or just the rear screen of the M10R, I can frame the image as precisely as I can with the SL2, even when going beyond the limits of the optical finder with, say, a 24mm lens. And with that resolution, I can reduce the number and size of lenses I carry. For me, actually, a complete M10R kit would consist of the 90 and 50 I already have, and an Elmar 24 3.8. Yeah, this guy. Really unsung. For the SL2, it's the Apo Summicron-SL SL35 and Sigma 85 I already own. Maybe the Lumix S Pro 16-35 f4, which, though a much bigger package, is still small enough to carry all day over my shoulder. And so it was, dear viewers, back there in the Amish countryside, that with a new clarity I understood not only can both kits be utterly brilliant and satisfying in my hands, so in consonance with the context in which I use them. So in consonance with how I want a camera to feel and operate in my hands. So far away from pages of menus, fiddly buttons, awkward ergonomics where every time I have the camera in hand I can feel and see the engineering trade-offs to cram as much capability into as small an object as possible, the kind of innumerable distractions and build quality of impermanence which now define most modern cameras and typically increase the distance between one's intent and execution, that I find myself thinking, now I really want the M10R too. It is the M I've been waiting for. Even if I really wish Leica offered a new high-resolution VisaFlex to match, preferably with the 5.7 million dot unit of the SL2, although, frankly, I'd be quite happy with the 3.7 million dot OLED unit of the Q2. Even if I wish they'd improve the battery life by, say, half. Even if I wish they could figure out how to incorporate IBIS, though I just don't see how. And while we're at it, even if I wish the SL2 had continuous, real-time depth-of-field preview like the Panasonics, in the meantime, my wishes for you are that you stay safe, be smart, vote wherever you are, and whatever camera you own, that you find joy and satisfaction in it. Thanks again to Audible for making this episode of Three Blind Men and an Elephant possible. Check them out at audible.com/Hugh Brownstone or by texting Hugh Brownstone to 500-500. Thanks, Audible. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation below. Support our work using our no-cost-to-you affiliate links, buying Streets of New York the book, shopping our merchandise store, dropping us coffee money via PayPal, or most especially, consider becoming a patron of ours via Patreon. Links for all down below. However you support us, as always, we thank you for it.